Hi, I'm Yitzhak Berger. I teach Hebrew at Risha. Parashat Terumah begins a series of parashiot that conclude the book of Shemot. And the arrangement of these parashiot is notable and quite distinct. We first encounter Terumah, which speaks about the directive to build a Mishkan, then Tetzaveh, which speaks of the directive primarily to put together the clothing for the Kohanim. The Parshiot of Vayakel and Pekudei, which end the book of Shemot, are largely a repetition of Terumah and Tetzaveh, but which impart to us the actual implementation of these directives of God. In the middle, of course, stands the sin of the golden calf. And the order of these Parshiot lends itself to a fairly straightforward explanation. Initially, the Israelites were supposed to contribute their gold and silver and other materials, demonstrating the initiative directed to God and seeking to bring the presence of God in their midst. When they proceed to direct that gold and silver, or gold specifically, to build the golden calf, they no longer merit the divine presence. And it's only later, when they do direct that initiative in the right direction, that they're able to build that Mishkan and achieve the divine presence in their midst. There are a number of indications of the loss of divine presence that they experience in the wake of the sin of the golden calf. The most clear one in the text is that after that sin, when Moshe Rabbeinu was to speak to God, he would have to take his tent outside the camp. Only later, at the end of the book, when they do gain the divine presence in their midst, do we find with the Mishkan built, now called the Ohel Moed, unlike Moshe's tent, which had been called Ohel Moed, the cloud of God descends into that Mishkan, and the presence of God is in the midst of the camp. Neither the Israelites nor Moshe Rabbeinu can enter it. Let's briefly point out that here in the beginning of Parashat Terumah, as well in the beginning of Parashat Tetzaveh, we have some famous phrases that tend to be sermonized on a great deal. They lend a certain substance to this list of materials that are otherwise harder to parse in terms of their significance. Here in Parashat Terumah we read, Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make for me a mikdash, and I will dwell amongst them. Or they shall make me a mikdash, and I will dwell amongst them. This verse very clearly indicates that it's the Israelite initiative, as we said, which draws the presence of God into the camp and among the Israelites. Parashat Tetzaveh has a similar verse, V'asu bigdei kodesh la'aron achicha lechavod uletiferet. The Israelites should make the clothing for Aaron the priest, for honor and for grandeur. There is one observation to make here about that pasuk, which is that while in Terumah we read that God says, I will dwell amongst them in response to their construction of the Mikdash. Here in Tetzaveh, next week's parsha, it does not say God will dwell amongst them. But it bears our attention that the language that's used, they should make clothing, holy clothing for Aaron, l'chavod u'letiferet, probably encapsulates that very concept as well. Because for who are they making these clothing? For Aaron himself? For the Kohanim as human beings who just got some special job? Certainly not. They're making these garments for the Kohanim as representatives of God. And when it says lichavod u'letiferet, it's not clear exactly to whom that kavod refers or how it manifests itself. But I would suggest that while the Chavod u'letiferet suggests that they are honoring God through making nice clothing for the Kohanim, what it really suggests is that much like V'shachanti b'tocham in Parashat Terumah, I will dwell amongst them in response to their initiative of constructing a mikdash, so too by making the begadim for Aaron, it's not simply the Israelites honoring God, but it is what will be for kavod. It is that initiative that will bring the Kvod Hashem into their camp. It will be God's response to their initiative. What justifies this reading? Towards the end of the book, in Parashat Pekudei, when they finally do merit that divine presence in the camp, it tells us that at that point, in the form of the cloud. The Kvod Hashem was Maleyat HaMishkan. The honor of God, the glory of God filled the Mishkan, the language of Kavod and the language of Mishkan, from those two key verses at the beginning of Terumah and the beginning of Tetzaveh. V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. You make me a mikdash, and I will dwell among you, and you make Bigdei Kodesh for Aaron and the rest of the Kohanim, and that will be for Kavod and Tiferet. That will be for the glory of God amongst you. When they finally direct their initiative to building the mikdash, making the garments, directing their materials and their energies to drawing that Shekhinah amongst themselves or unto themselves, that is what allows them to merit in the final analysis the Kvod Hashem Maleyat HaMishkan. Shabbat Shalom.